If you're new here, which you're probably not, my name's Rachel Zegler. If you're not, then same old shit, man. I'm so sorry to tell you. Welcome back.
It's clear that the reaction to this movie's lead actress has been overwhelmingly negative and, in many ways, unprecedented for a Disney production. From the moment her interviews began circulating online, audiences felt a disconnect between the image of Snow White they had cherished for decades and the person chosen to bring her back to life. Many fans have said bluntly that she simply doesn't belong in the role, that her presence feels forced, and that Disney made a major mistake by holding on to her despite mounting backlash. The criticism hasn't just been about her acting or interpretation of the role. It's about her attitude, her tone in interviews, and the sense of arrogance that seems to follow her public appearances. What could have been a charming revival of a timeless fairy tale has instead turned into a controversy that overshadows the entire project. Rachel Zegler, once seen as a rising star with enormous potential, has now become one of the most divisive figures in modern Hollywood discourse. She's often described as overly woke, but many feel that her approach to social and cultural issues comes across as condescending and disconnected from the story she's telling. Critics have accused her of using the film's press tour as a personal soapbox rather than a celebration of the work. Her comments dismissing the classic love story, particularly her statement that Snow White's prince literally stalks her, left a sour taste among longtime Disney fans. It made people feel as if she didn't respect the magic or innocence of the original tale, and instead viewed it through a harsh, modern lens that drained the story of its warmth and meaning. What was meant to be a progressive reinterpretation instead felt like an attack on the very foundation of the film's legacy. Even Gal Gadot, who plays the evil queen, has been pulled into the debate. While she's a respected actress and widely admired, audiences found it difficult to suspend disbelief when it came to the core dynamic of envy between the queen and Snow White. The evil queen's jealousy of Snow. White's beauty has always been a cornerstone of the story, but many fans simply couldn't buy into the idea that Gadot's character would feel threatened by Zegler's appearance. Even in a fantasy world filled with magic, mirrors, and dwarves, that element of the story stretched credibility beyond reason. This mismatch in casting made the entire film feel tonally confused and visually inconsistent, a problem that no amount of digital magic could fix. Behind the scenes, the damage was already done. Disney reportedly faced mounting internal tension as negative headlines and social media backlash snowballed. What began as a handful of critical sound bites evolved into a full-scale PR crisis, with leaked footage and Daily Mail reports revealing production struggles that the studio had hoped to keep hidden. The company expected audiences to embrace this reimagined Snow White as a modern, empowering update. But instead, the marketing campaign only exposed how disconnected the film had become from its roots. Viewers were quick to point out that the spirit of innocence, kindness, and optimism that defined the 1937 original had been replaced with cynicism and moral grandstanding. Ultimately, what was supposed to be a triumphant return for one of Disney's most iconic characters has turned into a cautionary tale about how not to handle a beloved legacy. Rather than uniting fans under a shared sense of nostalgia and excitement, the film has divided them, sparking heated debates about authenticity, respect for tradition, and the dangers of alienating the audience you're trying to inspire. With public trust severely damaged, Disney now finds itself in the difficult position of trying to rebuild a fairy tale that may have already lost its magic before even reaching the screen. Doom might be called a love story on paper, but in reality, it feels like the tragic love story between Hollywood and its audience, a relationship slowly crumbling under the weight of arrogance, misjudgment, and self-importance. What began as an ambitious attempt to modernize a fairy tale has turned into a case study in how to alienate an entire fan base. The controversy surrounding Snow White didn't just start with a movie. It started with an attitude, one that reeked of superiority, dismissiveness, and a lack of understanding of what made the original story timeless in the first place. From the very moment Disney announced Rachel Zegler as the new Snow White, the internet lit up with disbelief. It wasn't about her talent, she's undeniably gifted, but rather about her tone, her words, and how she carried herself while representing one of the most beloved characters in cinematic history. When Rachel spoke, it often felt less like she was honoring a legacy and more like she was mocking it. She didn't just distance herself from the 1937 classic, she tore it apart. She called the original creepy, outdated, and implied that its message was irrelevant in the modern world. Those weren't taken out of context. Those were her exact words, repeated confidently in interviews that Disney likely wished had never seen the light of day. For decades, audiences have adored Snow White, not because she was a warrior or a politician, but because she represented something pure: innocence, kindness, and the belief that love and goodness can conquer cruelty. Rachel's version, however, dismissed that as weakness. During her press tour, she proudly declared that this new Snow White wouldn't dream about true love, nor wait for a prince to save her. Instead, she'd be a leader, independent, assertive, self-sufficient. In theory, it sounded empowering. But in practice, the way she delivered those lines, with a smirk and an undertone of mockery, made it seem as if she looked down on everything the character once stood for. You could almost imagine Walt Disney himself turning in his cryogenic chamber, mourning the loss of a story that once brought joy and hope to millions. Then came the interviews, and each one made things worse. Instead of attempting to clarify her comments or reconnect with the fans who felt betrayed, Rachel doubled down. She ridiculed the original film, scoffed at the prince's role, and implied that those who loved the classic were simply stuck in the past. Her words didn't come across as bold or forward-thinking. They came across as dismissive and condescending. Every new clip that surfaced online added fuel to the fire, painting her not as the bright new face of Disney's next era, but as its most controversial mistake. Even Gal Gadot, who was cast as the evil queen, couldn't escape the chaos. The film's press tour, which should have been a celebration of Disney magic, instead became an ongoing PR disaster. Reporters asked awkward questions, fans voiced outrage online, and Disney executives reportedly scrambled behind the scenes to control the damage. The studio eventually scaled back the Hollywood premiere, an almost unheard-of move for a production of this size, but insiders claimed they had no choice. The backlash had become so severe that every public appearance risked becoming a meme or another viral moment of embarrassment. And then came the statement that truly sealed Rachel's reputation in the eyes of many: her remark about pay. With full confidence, she declared that she deserved to be paid for every single stream of the movie because she would be standing there for 18 hours in the dress of an iconic Disney princess. The comment, which she likely thought was empowering or assertive, struck audiences as tone-deaf, entitled, and out of touch with reality. In a time when fans were already frustrated with Disney's corporate greed, hearing the film's star echo the same kind of self-importance only deepened their resentment. By the time Snow White was ready for release, what should have been a joyous return to classic storytelling had turned into something entirely different: a cultural battlefield. Longtime Disney fans felt insulted, parents felt uneasy, and younger audiences were simply indifferent. The film wasn't even out yet, but its reputation had already collapsed under the weight of controversy. It was supposed to be a tale of empowerment, but instead, it became a cautionary reminder that empowerment without respect for legacy often comes across as arrogance. In the end, Snow White became a mirror not of beauty, but of the industry itself, fractured, defensive, and unsure of what audiences truly want anymore. Disney had set out to create a modern fairy tale for a new generation, but somewhere along the way, it lost sight of the heart that made these stories endure for nearly a century. Instead of magic and hope, the audience was left with lectures and headlines. And as the dust settled, one truth became painfully clear. Sometimes, the most dangerous poison isn't the one given by an evil queen. It's the pride that blinds those who believe they can rewrite a legend and still keep its soul intact. When Rachel Zegler looked straight into the camera and declared, "I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online," it wasn't just a comment, it was a cultural moment, the kind that ripples through Hollywood like a shockwave. You could almost hear the simultaneous thud of 1,000 studio executives' hands hitting their foreheads in disbelief. The timing couldn't have been worse. The film hadn't premiered, not a single review had dropped, and box office numbers were still a distant dream. Yet here she was, confidently demanding royalties for a movie no one had seen, a movie that many already predicted would crash and burn long before opening weekend. And of course, that's exactly what happened. When Snow White finally hit theaters, the result wasn't a fairy tale revival, it was a cinematic implosion. Critics panned it, audiences mocked it, and social media turned it into a meme factory. The once magical brand of Disney had produced a film that was supposed to celebrate empowerment, but instead became a case study in how to alienate every demographic at once. And at the center of that storm stood Rachel Zegler, a performer whose own words had sabotaged her before the first ticket was even sold. It takes a special kind of misfire to turn a Disney princess into a PR disaster. Rachel had managed to alienate fans, frustrate parents, and even exhaust her co-star Gal Gadot, the literal evil queen of the film, who suddenly seemed like the more sympathetic one. Every joint appearance between the two women looked like a silent struggle for survival. Red carpet photos captured 1,000 awkward moments. Rachel laughing too loudly while Gal smiled tightly beside her, eyes darting toward the nearest exit. Fans noticed the tension instantly. Comments flooded in. "Gal looks like she's about to quit mid-interview," one user joked. Another wrote, "She's smiling like someone who's been threatened by HR." Then came the Oscars, and the moment that perfectly encapsulated the unease. When Rachel and Gal stepped onto the stage to present the award for Best Visual Effects, the atmosphere was as cold as a glacier. They stood at opposite ends of the podium, perfectly framed yet painfully distant. There was no friendly banter, no shared warmth, just the uncomfortable silence of two people pretending to like each other for the sake of live television. As Rachel delivered her lines with theatrical bravado, Gal stared forward, her expression carved in polite exhaustion. If looks could speak, hers said, "I've had enough of this fairy tale." But awkward red carpets and viral interviews were just the surface. The real issue lay within the film itself. Disney had promised a bold, modern retelling of Snow White, a version fit for a new generation. Instead, what audiences got felt less like a reinvention and more like a rejection of everything the story had ever represented. Gone were the dwarfs, gone was the prince, and gone was the sense of innocence and wonder that defined the original. The film stripped away every ounce of magic, replacing it with a hollow message about inner fairness and finding your truth. In one interview, Rachel earnestly explained that her Snow White no longer got her name from the fairness of her skin. As she put it, she gets her name from surviving a snowstorm. The metaphor was supposed to be empowering, but it came across as forced and self-important. The studio tried to spin it as a progressive twist, a fresh take for a modern audience, but audiences weren't buying it. Parents expected enchantment. Instead, they got moral lectures disguised as dialogue. Kids who had begged to see the film left bored and restless, and longtime Disney fans, the ones who had grown up cherishing the original, felt betrayed. The creative team defended the changes with long-winded explanations about symbolism and social progress. They talked about how true beauty comes from within, and how the story's new meaning was about equality, empathy, and personal strength. It sounded nice in interviews, poetic even, but it failed where it mattered most, on screen. The dialogue felt heavy-handed, the pacing slow and the tone lifeless. The movie forgot that fairy tales don't need to preach. They need to move. They need to make you believe in magic, not roll your eyes at metaphors. Meanwhile, Rachel kept talking, and every word made things worse. What could have been a graceful opportunity to rebuild goodwill turned into a non-stop series of PR blunders. Every press junket became another chapter in the saga of how to lose an audience in 10 minutes. Instead of expressing humility or excitement, she came across as defiant and self-righteous. Her interviews became less about Snow White and more about Rachel Zegler's personal philosophy. She didn't just promote a movie, she promoted herself, casting every criticism as sexism or ignorance. Her sound bites became internet fuel. In one clip, she dismissed the prince as weird. In another, she laughed about how boring the original was. In yet another, she claimed her version of Snow White was smarter than before. Each quote spread like wildfire, cementing her reputation as Hollywood's most unlikable rising star. Even neutral viewers, people who might have otherwise given the film a chance, began to turn away, frustrated by the arrogance radiating from what was supposed to be Disney's next big princess. Behind the scenes, insiders claimed that Disney executives were panicking. The PR disaster had spiraled beyond repair. The studio quietly scaled back the Hollywood premiere, canceled several interviews, and tried to distance the film's marketing from Rachel's now infamous remarks. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The film was no longer being judged on its own merit. It was being judged as the embodiment of everything audiences resented about modern Hollywood. The arrogance, the preaching, the hypocrisy. When Snow White finally hit theaters, it didn't soar. It sank. The box office numbers were dismal, the reviews brutal, and the audience reactions scathing. Viewers didn't walk away with a sense of wonder. They walked away shaking their heads, asking how a company with nearly a century of storytelling experience could miss the mark this badly. What was supposed to be a celebration of Disney's timeless legacy turned into a symbol of its creative decline. And at the heart of it all stood Rachel Zegler, a performer whose talent was overshadowed by her own attitude. She went into Snow White as a promising young actress with a golden opportunity to define a generation. She came out as the face of one of Disney's greatest modern embarrassments. In trying so hard to make a statement, she lost sight of the story. And in trying to modernize a fairy tale, Disney forgot what made their magic real in the first place. Because the truth is, people don't go to Disney movies to be lectured about morality or ideology. They go to remember how it feels to believe in something pure, something hopeful. They go for the dream, for the music, for the happily ever after. But this time, there was no happily ever after. Just awkward interviews, empty theaters, and a lingering question echoing through Hollywood. What happens when a princess forgets how to be one? She wasn't just clapping back at trolls. She was waging a quiet, losing war against her own audience. What began as a few defensive comments on social media soon spiraled into something far greater, something darker. It stopped being about a movie, or even about Snow White. It became a full-blown cultural moment, a conversation about ego, tone, and how one person's inability to read the room can collapse an entire multi-million-dollar empire. Rachel Zegler wasn't just defending herself online. She was drawing a battle line between herself and the very fans who once would have cheered her on. And when the backlash arrived, swift, loud, and merciless, she didn't retreat. She didn't pause. She dug in her heels. She doubled down, then tripled down, turning every wave of criticism into a new speech about empowerment, authenticity, and the supposed bravery of speaking one's truth. But the truth she was selling wasn't landing. It didn't sound brave. It sounded bitter. It sounded like someone mistaking defiance for confidence. Instead of finding grace in the moment, she grabbed a metaphorical megaphone and shouted louder. What might have been a simple misunderstanding between actress and audience mutated into a months-long spectacle that Disney could not control, no matter how many PR teams they threw at it. Her Instagram stories became a theater of their own, dimly lit monologues where she'd appear in hoodies, eyes tired, voice firm, talking about how she was proud of her work, even if the world didn't get it. To some, it sounded heartfelt. To most, it sounded like denial, a desperate insistence that she was right while the entire internet screamed otherwise. The press tour, once meant to generate buzz and excitement, turned into a slow-motion implosion. Each interview brought another viral quote, another cringeworthy soundbite that would dominate Twitter threads for days. It wasn't marketing anymore. It was self-destruction disguised as confidence. Rachel Zegler didn't just play Snow White. She became the living cautionary tale. A story whispered in studio hallways, a name mentioned with a sigh by PR agents everywhere. This wasn't a single bad day or one unfortunate headline. It was a consistent pattern. A slow-burning chain reaction that started the moment she dismissed the original film as creepy and outdated. From that point on, the internet had decided this wasn't just a casting mistake. It was an era-defining example of what happens when ideology overshadows storytelling. By the time Snow White actually limped into theaters, the outcome was already written. The world wasn't waiting to see if the movie would succeed. They were waiting to see how spectacularly it would fail. And fail it did. With a pitiful $45 million opening and a humiliating 1.6 IMDb rating, the film didn't simply flop. It imploded. The box office numbers weren't surprising. They were expected. The memes had been made months earlier. The jokes wrote themselves. When critics began posting their reviews, the collective tone was less outrage and more pity. Everyone knew this train wreck was coming. They had just been counting down the days. What made it worse was the tone online. This wasn't disappointment. It was celebration. Fans didn't quietly ignore the movie. They actively mocked it. Hashtags trended, mocking the modern version of the story. YouTube channels uploaded reaction videos titled, "I tried to watch Snow White so you don't have to." Twitter threads analyzed Rachel's interviews like postmortems of a cultural experiment gone wrong. Disney, once untouchable, found itself being ridiculed in real time. Somehow, they had managed to turn one of their most iconic properties into the first ever anti-fairy tale fairy tale. Not an empowering reimagining, but a soulless product wrapped in the illusion of progress. And just when the chaos felt like it couldn't grow any stranger, it did. That was when the OnlyFans rumor hit. Out of nowhere, an AI-generated Rachel Zegler account appeared on the platform, instantly racking up thousands of followers. It wasn't verified, it wasn't real, but for a haunting moment, no one could tell. The internet froze, then erupted. Some joked, some gasped, some genuinely believed it. And in that bizarre pause, one truth became painfully clear. Rachel's public image had crossed into a realm of parody. She had become such a magnet for controversy that even a deepfake scandal felt believable. Her defenders called it cruel. Her critics called it karma. But for Disney, it was pure disaster. Behind the scenes, executives were in damage control overdrive. Calls were being made, strategies rewritten, premieres scaled back. This wasn't just about one movie performing poorly, it was about the erosion of a brand. The once golden Disney princess had become a lightning rod for outrage, and that outrage was infecting everything around her. Theaters started pulling Snow White from key showtimes. Not in a loud, publicized way, but quietly, like sweeping broken glass under a rug. Family matinees vanished. Evening screenings were cut. In some locations, the film was pushed to early mornings and late nights. Cinematic exile. It was the unthinkable, a Disney princess film being buried by its own distributors. It was like being uninvited from your own coronation. And as this catastrophe unfolded, an older story resurfaced, one that many had forgotten. The Wicked chapter? Long before she put on the Snow White dress, Rachel had been circling another dream role, Elphaba, the green-skinned anti-heroine of one of Broadway's biggest hits. She dropped subtle hints, covered Wicked songs online, and even teased fans about a possible audition. But insiders later revealed that what seemed like ambition came with warning signs, the same impulsive behavior, the same need to dominate every space she entered. Early meetings grew tense. Studio executives started to see the same storm clouds Disney would later ignore. And before things could escalate, they quietly closed the door on her. No drama, no headlines, just silence. Fast forward to now, and Rachel's career feels like it's frozen in midair, trapped between potential and fallout. Once heralded as Hollywood's next great star, the bright young face of a new generation of leading ladies, she's now treated like a warning label, a name studios whisper about when discussing what not to do. Because in Hollywood, memory is short, but reputations last. Her fall isn't about a single failure, it's about accumulation. One misstep after another until the narrative writes itself. The movie failed. The interviews bombed. The memes thrived. Her co-star, Gal Gadot, visibly uncomfortable beside her, became a meme herself. Every frame, every soundbite, every awkward smile told a story of two worlds colliding. One polished, controlled, graceful, and the other chaotic, loud, and painfully self-aware. Yet what makes it all the more surreal is that Rachel seems completely unfazed. She's still posting, still performing, still talking about empowerment and voice and authenticity, as if the world hasn't moved on. But the silence surrounding her says everything. No studio offers, no co-star support. No fan campaigns begging for her return, just a quiet void where a career once was. And that silence is louder than any hate comment. Because Hollywood isn't cruel, it's calculating. It doesn't destroy careers out of spite. It simply moves on when someone stops being profitable. And right now, Rachel Zegler isn't a risk worth taking. From Disney darling to digital punchline, her downfall didn't come overnight. It unfolded frame by frame, tweet by tweet, soundbite by soundbite, until Snow White, one of the most beloved stories ever told, became the obituary of a career. And like all good fairy tales, it comes with a moral. In Hollywood, being the fairest of them all doesn't mean being the loudest or the most righteous. It means knowing when to listen, when to learn, and when to stop trying to rewrite the story that made you who you are. Because no amount of modern messaging can save a kingdom built on arrogance. And no one, not even a princess, can outshine her own shadow.